Well, America, I'm so happy to have you here. We've talked several times, and in fact, the last time we talked, I was like, well, that could have been the podcast.
I remember.
Because we just, it was so organic, it was so easy. And we have actually, you and I have been on a previous podcast through Cost of Care.
Yes.
Where we were accompanied by Sarah Warren.
Yes.
And that was such a wonderful experience because your son was the host of that one. Such a great podcast, by the way. Anyone who's listening has to go check out Cost of Care. It's wherever you get your podcasts. So,
I endorse that, but I'm a little biased. So,
you know, you are because you're his mother, but I am not. I was on it, but I requested to be on it. I basically went back to our company and I said, we should absolutely sponsor an episode on Cost of Care. This is an amazing podcast, and I think we have the ability to really reach some people and talk about things that matter to us. And I had already listened to a few different episodes, one of them being the $1 Million Baby, which
I heard that as well. Yes.
That one was just, that really blew me away. So yes, if anyone has an opportunity, go listen to America's Son's podcast, Cost of Care. and today we get the opportunity to talk to you. And I would just love for you to just introduce yourself to the audience, tell them who you are and how long you've been a nurse. And because we're going to be talking about nursing through the ages.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Cara, and I appreciate the invitation to be talking with you again today. And I did enjoy our last conversation. You're easy to talk to, and I'm very much looking forward, finally, to this day has arrived after a couple of little setbacks. So I'll start with, my name is America Farrell, and my first name really is America. A lot of people ask me how I got my name. My father was very patriotic. He was an advisor to President Eisenhower. I was born in an election year. I was his last child, and I was born out of the country. So I think he got a little carried away with all that and just went a little crazy. He was a little eccentric anyway, in a good way. But he actually wanted to name me Miss America, with Miss being my first name and America being my middle name. And luckily my mother stepped in and drew a line, set a boundary, and said, we're not doing that to this child. So anyway, my name is America, but everybody's called me Missy. That's my family name, is Missy. So we got the Miss and the America in there finally. But anyway, I was born in 1955, so I am a product of the last century. So I'm glad you invited me on to do Nursing Through the Ages, because I do feel qualified at this point to do that.
I hope it doesn't come across as I think you're old. That is not the case at all.
No.
You're just qualified.
Well qualified, and I've got deep perspective on this.
Yes.
I graduated from high school in 1973, graduated from LPN school in 1975, and went straight to work. I wasn't sure at the time that I wanted to be a nurse. I was not one of those girls that grew up in my life playing nurse or anything like that. It was more of a practical decision. And in the culture I was raised, it was not uncommon for women to get a college education. But predominantly the education was either in liberal arts or in fine arts. And somewhere in the back of my head, my plan was to grow up, marry a rich man, and live in a cottage with a white picket fence and have babies and, be part of the bridge club and junior league and things like that. But I just
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, right. But I just always had this little nagging thought in the back of my head that, what if that doesn't work out? Maybe I ought to get something vocationally that I can support myself. So the three options that I saw that would were reasonable for me to attain at that point in my life was either being a teacher, being a secretary, or being a nurse. And I thought being a secretary sounded boring. Sorry to any secretaries out there. I've since learned that I was very wrong about that. I knew I did not have the patience to be a school teacher. So I thought by process of elimination, that just leaves nursing. So I went ahead and joined a VOTEC school. And I thought, well, I'll go get my LPN. Back then it was 18 months. And I thought, well, at least, I have something to make a living while I figure out what I really want to do. But within 2 weeks into the program, I had already been down to the RN school in my community and talked to them about signing up because I instantly fell in love with nursing. And they were already full for that year, so I couldn't get in here. But long story short, I was able to clip out what I had done in LPN school and go in the second year. And I went to a diploma program, which for any nurses listening, some of you may remember what a diploma program is. And thank you. It's a 3-year
I do. I
program.
do.
For those of you who don't know, it's a 3-year program. Back then, we didn't have associate's degree and we didn't have a bachelor's degree either. I mean, it was diploma or nothing. And basically, you lived in a dorm on the campus of a hospital and you were the slave labor of the hospital. And in return, you got a great education, and I will say a great education. And we had to be on the floor at 7 every morning with a smile on our face and our white uniform starched and our cap and our white hose and our white shoes. And um, we worked all day, every day. Like I said, we were basically the slave labor, but you really learned a lot that way. Graduated from nursing school in 1978, and I had worked as an LVN in the intensive care unit, putting myself through RN school. Um, and when I got out of RN school, I stayed in ICU because that was my love. That was my first love. It's been my only really love.
Isn't that
And
amazing that I just want to make a note that you were an LVN in the intensive care unit, which is not something you hear about anymore.
oh, you can't
You
do it
don't
anymore.
you don't hear about LVNs actually in the acute care space that often. But
No,
I
not
think that maybe
anymore.
that's coming back a little bit more. But I just wanted to note that really quickly because I thought that that's a really interesting call out that that's where you
Yeah, and
worked.
we could do everything that an RN could do except hang blood.
Wow.
So we could do everything an RN could do. So it was in the ICU. Now, I don't want to
Could you
get
do assessments? Could you do
yes,
assessments too?
yes,
Oh wow.
yes. We
Not
did
just
full
data
assessments.
collection.
No, we did everything in the ICU. Now, not to make this too complicated, but out on the floor back then, they had team nursing. So you had the RN doing the assessments, hanging of the blood, the complicated things, checking off orders. Your LVN, your LPN, whatever you call it, was the medication nurse.
Mhm.
And then you also had a CNA. So every day you were a team of 3 and you might have, 8 patients. And we'll talk about that again in just a little bit.
Yes.
I hope bring
Yes.
bring me back to that because nowadays out on the floor it's not uncommon for one nurse to have 8 patients. And I do
Yes.
want to touch on that a little bit.
I'm sorry I
Um,
interrupted you, but I was like, I don't want to skip past that because I think that
no,
that's such an interesting thing that you were, that you called out that you used to work as an LVN in an intensive care unit.
yeah, and that's how I pretty much put myself through RN school. Um, anyway, I worked as an ICU nurse for 27-ish years. And when I was in my early 50s, and anybody listening, I want to tell you it's never too late. When I was 44, so I completed a master's degree, but I did an MBA, not an MSN. Got a little bit of heat from that, but I persisted anyway and ended up going into hospital administration. And so you can be a nurse manager, director with a bachelor's degree And I had to go back also and get my bachelor's degree, which I completed at age 40. And then at 42, I was back in school pursuing a master's degree, an MBA, finished with that around age 44-ish, something like that. Worked as a nursing director at various hospitals in an ICU, progressive care units. Often I had ICU, progressive care unit, and ER all under me. Um, I also, kind of did some other things which aren't relevant really to this conversation, but just know pretty much my whole background was ICU, some emergency room. Um, and then I went to work for a company when I was about 50-ish to be an internal consultant with them. I traveled a lot, saw a lot of different hospitals, and I was their ICU consultant. And I'd go out to their hospitals and help identify where some problem areas were, that kind of thing. And I came back and I kept going, the hospital's really good. The nurses are really fantastic, but I don't know about the leadership. Anyway, long story short, I decided I wanted to be a hospital CEO. So at age 53, I hop out and get thrown into the pool, found my company. I'm always will be grateful that they gave me that opportunity. And I was a COO for about a year and a half, and then I got my own shop. So I've been a hospital CEO nonstop since 2009,
Wow.
and was CEO of probably 4 or 5 different hospitals. I would get moved around within my company. And then I wrapped up my career I retired about a year and a half ago, about 2 years ago. So I got about 50 years in of my career, and it's been a great journey. Started as an LPN, ended up as a hospital CEO. And a big shout out from me to any RN CEOs that are out there, because it's a long journey and a completely different skill set. But I will always say that nurses make the best CEOs because we are all about the patients and we can keep our hospitals focused on patient centered care.
I
So that's my
could not
journey.
agree. I could not agree more. And everything that you just said is exactly why I wanted you to come and speak, with us and with the audience. So, because you have a very unique perspective, because you have worked bedside for many, many years. You've worked management for many
Many,
years,
many years.
many, many years. And you've also now, you're over on the administrative side as a CEO. And I think a lot of times what happens is that some of the people, some of the nurses that are at the bedside, there's this we kind of demonize the administrative, like they don't understand us. So there's
Right.
this huge disconnect between feeling like the CEO or the upper administration understands or truly understands the pain points of what the frontline staff is facing. And
And
yeah,
and doctors very much are like that as well. As it's not just the nurses that
no,
demonize administration. It's the physicians. And as a CEO, I was on the receiving end of that a lot. Um, but it also taught me a lot. And one of the main things that I learned when I very first started my very first shop, first day, I put up an 8 by 10 framed picture of my nursing graduation picture. So I'm like, 55 years old at this point, and this is my picture of me when I was 22. And I got it right on my credenza, like you can't miss it. And I thought, well, this is either going to make me or break me. I'm going to see how this goes. And also, in a few minutes, I know we'll talk about a little bit of gender bias
yeah,
and nurse doctor uh,
dynamics.
dyna- dynamics. And I thought, okay, this is either going to make me or break me. But without exception, every physician that walked in my office went, "You're a nurse? Oh, thank goodness. I can talk
Oh,
to you. I can talk to you now and you'll get it."
that's
And
wonderful. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
it was really, really good. And so if they wanted to come in and yell at me about the nurses are not getting I's and O's on the chart fast enough, or radiology is having a problem. And I had been a COO, so I had also been well versed in imaging, lab, pharmacy, all the other ancillaries, the therapies. I'd managed all of those as well. Knew nothing about them when I started. And, literally my first day as a COO, I walked down to imaging, and the director had been there for like 25 years. And I just said, "Hey, Carlos, I'm your new boss. Need to let you know I know absolutely nothing about imaging and your department, how you run it, what's important to you, and you're going to need to teach me." And I think that's the attitude that made me successful, was not going in like I knew everything. It was the same thing in pharmacy. It was the same thing in lab. I mean, I didn't know anything about the uh, nuts and bolts of how any of those departments worked. But anyway, that was good training for me. And then so when I got to be a CEO, I did have that broad knowledge of pretty much every department in the hospital. Just and I could say to anyone that came in my office, just tell me what your problem is, and I think we could fix this. So
Yeah.
it was
So
good training for me.
So I think that that's also a nice shout out to say, hey, if you're thinking about going back to school, you don't have to go for your MSN. You don't have to go for your DNP. You know, you can go for an MBA and you can effectively move up into positions where you can feel like you can move the needle and be effective in changing healthcare systems. So,
Right. And even when I did that, that was back in 2000, 2001. And even then, um, when I was applying to uh, university where I did my MBA, and I won't call it out because I don't want to, you know, embarrass them. But when I was applying and interviewing, the question just kept coming up, why do you want an MBA? You're a nurse.
you're just a nurse, America. You're just a nurse.
Yeah,
We
you're a
hate,
nurse. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like
we
you're a
hate that
nurse.
just
What
a
could
nurse.
what could you possibly understand about business? You're a nurse. You're just a nurse. And I just said, listen, I'm accountable every day for what goes on my floor. And no, nobody teaches you business in nursing school. Nobody teaches you really what an FTE is or how to stay within a budget. I mean, I didn't hear any of that. I grew up in the day, which was, I'm here to take care of patients and you're here to worry about the money. Don't bother me with such nonsense. I'm just going to take care of patients. And I've lived through years and years of change. I'll just put it. And, you kind of have to adapt with the times. And so that's why I wanted to do an MBA, just because I could get a little bit more business knowledge. Um, that was
Yeah.
just for me because I knew I wanted to go into administration. And you can do three things as a nurse. You can either go the education pathway and be an educator. You can go the clinical pathway, be like nurse practitioner, or
Clinical nurse specialist or
clinical,
something like
yeah,
that.
clinical nurse specialist, any of that, or you can go the administrative pathway. And I already knew I wanted to go to the administrative pathway. So that's more why I did that. And we didn't even have, we may have had one or two MHA programs, but they were very rare when I did my MBA. And so that was the closest thing. If I had it to do it again, I'd probably do an MHA.
Yeah, that
I'll,
makes sense. Like that, I think that's another good alternative. That if you don't want to do an MBA, like the MHA is probably a good. That's a good pathway.
right. And I even have friends, though, now that have an MHA and have gone back to get MBA on top of that, just because they wanted that little bit more depth of knowledge. And I was blessed to go to a really good MBA program, and I'm glad for that. The the director of the program had actually been the dean of Harvard MBA program and had left to
Wow.
kind of found this one. And so brought a wealth of knowledge and experience with her. And yeah, she wasn't really sure about me. Told me I was kind of there. She's gonna watch me, and see how I did.
That's
And
so interesting. I mean, I think that brings up a really good point of you were talking about gender bias, and I think if we go way back, if we go back 50 years, or even further, I had interviewed Dr. Ann Burgess. Are you familiar? Do you know?
yes, you
Yes.
turned me on to her, and
Yes.
I've done a lot of study and research and watching, and she's amazing.
She's so cool. I was totally fangirling over that.
Yes.
So she talks about a little bit of what it was like, and but very briefly. So for you, when you first went into, I know we talked a little bit about how women had a couple of like typical options for them, like you said, secretary, teacher, nurse, and that tended, and if they were going back to school, it was something in the arts, liberal arts, or
Fine
fine
arts,
arts, something to that,
homemaking. Yeah.
homemaking, stuff like that. But even though you did choose, so you did choose nursing, but it was still, I mean, I would say it was still very oppressive.
Okay, so it was. Now, I'm gonna, if you'll indulge me for a moment,
Yeah,
this may take maybe 3 minutes. I'm
you
gonna
can
take
take as
you,
much as you want.
I'm gonna take you back to 1887 for just a moment.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a perspective. And I did the math this morning before I got on the podcast. And if I go 2024 minus 1887, that's 137 years. If you divide that by two, that's 68 years. So I'm 68 years old right now.
Okay.
So that's my lifetime and just one other lifetime. So I went not that far back. To be
No.
honest, that's like two lifetimes ago. But let me tell you what life looked like for a nurse in 1887. And you may have seen this, but for your listeners out there that haven't, this is called an 1887 nursing job description.
I
Okay?
can't wait. I can't wait. I'm so
Okay.
excited.
In addition to caring for your 50 patients, each bedside nurse will follow these regulations, and there's 9 of them. Number 1, daily sweep and mop the floors of your ward, dust the patient's furniture and window sills. 2, maintain an even temperature in your ward by bringing in a scuttle of coal for the day's business. 3, light is important to observe the patient's condition. Therefore, each day fill the kerosene lamps, clean chimneys, and trim wicks. Number 4, the nurse's notes are important in aiding your physician's work. Make your pens carefully.
Oh my
Make your
gosh.
pens
Make them.
carefully. And you may whittle the nibs to your individual taste. So I'm not sure if they meant pens or pencils, but either way, you had to make them. But you could whittle the knobs to your individual taste. That's important.
Were they actually using ink like
Yeah,
back then? I think it was like where
yeah,
you dipped in ink, right?
yes. 5, each nurse on day duty will report every day at 7 a.m. That hasn't changed, and leave at 8 p.m. We're kind of back to that now, except on the Sabbath, on which day she will be off from noon to 2 p.m. 6, graduate nurses in good standing with the director of nurses will be given an evening off, one evening off each week for courting purposes, or 2 evenings a week if she regularly attends church. 7, I know. Isn't this hard to imagine
I can't.
nowadays?
I know. So I
I
guess
see you cringing.
this is gonna inform a lot of our conversation.
Okay, 7, each nurse should lay aside from each payday a goodly sum of her earnings for her benefits during her declining years, so that she will not become a burden to others. For example, if you earn $30 a month, you should set aside 15. Now that's not a goodly sum. That's half of your paycheck.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Number 8, any nurse who smokes, uses liquor in any form, gets her hair done at a beauty shop, or frequents dance halls will give the director of nurses good reason to suspect her worth, intentions, and integrity.
Wow.
9, the nurse who performs her labors and serves her patients and doctors faithfully and without fault for a period of 5 years will be given an increase by the hospital administration of 5 cents a day. Now, I did look up in preparation for this how much 5 cents a day is, in our modern day money, and it would be $1.66. So every nurse now, if they perform faithfully for 5 years, can get $1.60 a day, or if you do the math, $49.80, almost $50 a month. But that's after 5 years, and then you get $50 a month. So
Wow.
now let's fast forward a little bit to 1970 or so.
I'm so
And
curious, by the way, and I'm gonna
yes,
look this up. And I encourage our listeners to look this up. I want to know what the job description is for a doctor back in 18, like just to see how much more well respected they
yes,
are in that. It would be so interesting to see the difference.
absolutely. Absolutely.
We should all do that.
We should we should all do that. So I was I'm gonna come on up to 1970. I lost my train of thought here for just a second. Hold on a minute.
Don't worry, we have editing.
Okay, don't worry, we have editing. Um, oh, I know what I was going to tell you. In 1970, I was in boarding school. I went to boarding school for high school, and I was in an all-girls boarding school in the Deep South. And just to let you know that urban legend, I don't know if any of your listeners out there will remember a TV show called Gunsmoke. And there used to be a character on there named Miss Kitty. And she was the brothel owner, but beloved by everyone. She was the mainstay of the whole town. And you had, the sheriff, and it was a great show, Gunsmoke. But Miss Kitty went to my same boarding school when she was a teenager, but she was expelled for filing her fingernails in public. So, yes, we've
Whoa.
come a long way from 1887, but even fast forward almost 100 years, there still was a lot of preconceptions about how a lady should conduct herself, and nurses were held to an even higher standard than regular ladies because we were angels of mercy and we were the doctor's handmaidens and we were all this and all that. And so, 1973 comes around. I graduated from high school by 1975. And, from 73 to 75, I'm a student in my LPN program. From 75 to 78, I'm a student in my RN program. And, when we were the nurses, when the doctor arrived on the floor, the nurses had to get up out of our seat at the nurses station, give him our chair, and bring him his coffee, cigarette, and ashtray. And then when he went to go rounding on the patients, we followed behind with our chart, with all the patient charts. We carried them. We were his caddy. we carried them and we had to hand them to him, and then he would write in them and then give them back to us. So we had this great big, stack of charts we're carrying down the hall. I just still don't know why then, they didn't have little carts, but I guess that was another story. And at that time, around 1973 to 1975, the world was just starting to let nurses take blood pressures, or at least where I was, because they felt like that was too highly technical a task for nurses. To put the cuff on, get it right, use the stethoscope, listen to the blood pressure. That was a doctor's job.
For those of you who can't see me, I'm just sitting in horror. I just the whole time, it's my face is just contorted in just disbelief, and it's just so hard to believe that we were thought so little of.
Well, and God forbid that you would ever question a doctor writing an order. This is part of the reason I wanted to go into the ICU, was because they let you do a little more in the ICU. The doctors had a little bit more respect for you in the ICU, and it was just life was a little better in the ICU or specialty areas, ER, operating room, cath lab. Not that cath labs were all that popular yet back then, but specialty areas, you got more leeway, and you got to do cooler stuff.
Did you
And that's
feel like
what
a lot of nurses, I'm just so curious, like, did you feel like a lot of nurses, like sometimes like I look, I read things about the past, or I hear things about the past, and I wonder if the nurses felt as oppressed as when we look back on it. Like if in the moment they were like, this is wrong.
I'll give you my opinion, and not all of your listeners would agree with me, but I don't think so. I think we were programmed to believe what we believe. I think we were conditioned, and we were, I don't want to be so cynical and say we were sold the fairy tale, but I'm just, for this purposes of this, we were sold
Yeah.
the fairy tale that we were angels of mercy. Come on, we're all dressed in white every day. We're sitting at the patient's bedside. Um, part of our evening care that we did every night included a back rub, and we sit and we listen to them, and it was very holistic, and we really were like angels to the sick and the dying. And I think part of what just came along with it was that, yeah, we were often disrespected by physicians. Um, but that was just,
That was part of it.
that was
That
just
was just
part
kind of
of
part of
it.
it.
And
But did
you
you feel
dealt
like
with
you
it.
actually had more, like you were more satisfied with the work that you were doing? Because I do think that some of what's missing today is actually some of what you just said, like sitting at the bedside, the holding space, the listening, the showing up, being able to be an ear to them. We miss that
Right.
now. Like some of that's actually missing.
Oh, that's a lot of that is missing. And,
Yeah.
to my point, um, when we did team nurses, we may have 12 patients, or maybe even 14, maybe 12, 13, 14, depending on where you work. But you're a team, you're team nursing. And there's an old Indian proverb that says, one man cannot build a house alone, but two men working together can build a village.
Oh,
And so,
that's cool.
because of synergy.
Yep.
So every day you go in, you've got your team. And, it would be fun to have competitions with the other teams. And, we loved it. It was, you have a friend. And then when we went to primary nursing, it became you, yourself, and you. And they started with, okay, you've got 4 patients. But at the time, they also took the unit clerks away. So you were putting in your own orders. You were doing everything, including often cleaning the rooms and emptying the trash for the patients. And yeah, housekeeping comes around once a day, but if you're in an ICU, you fill up that trash can 3 or 4 times during your shift. I mean, so you're doing everything. Now, if you're in an ICU though, to my point, you've usually got, back then we had 2 patients. So I always felt like I could just take really, really good care of the 2 patients.
Hmm.
But I'm talking about the floor nurses that originally were told that they would take 4 patients a day. Then it creeped up to 5. And they kind of started to do away with the CNAs. So maybe you'd have one CNA for your whole unit for the day.
Yep.
Well, good luck trying to get somebody to help you change a bed, get a patient up, do a bath, walk somebody after surgery. It's like, no, it's you.
Yep.
We didn't have that in team nursing, and I'm just a huge proponent of team nursing. And I know some places are easing back into that, and I say congratulations to
What
them.
about where you work? Has that been kind of, are you bringing that back a little bit more or
Well,
trying to?
I've been retired for a couple of years, so I can't really speak to
Yeah.
what they're doing currently, but there was talk of that, because
Right.
how do we bring some synergy? Because to me, the problem is you have all these nurses doing primary nursing, but each man is an island. It's like every man for himself, and it's very, very, very difficult. And the nurses are heroes. They're just heroes. I don't know how they do what they do, especially during COVID. I could cry just even talking about the sacrifices that nurses have made. Um, but anyway, we'll get back on topic. But that's just sort of how I've seen the
Slow boiled.
evolution.
It's like people got slow
Yeah,
boiled. You know,
yeah,
you just kind of, the heat just kind of slowly creeps up. And, you know, they say, I don't think this is actually true at all, but they're like, oh, if you put a frog in
frog.
water and you just kind of slow boil them, they won't jump out. But if you throw them right into a boiling pot, they'll like jump right out of the water. I think it's a good visual because I think that
Yeah,
happens a lot is
and
that
there is a
you
lot of truth to that.
yeah.
And I remember when I still remember when nurses petitioned in most places and went from wearing whites to wearing scrubs. And at first,
Oh, yeah. When was that?
in my lifetime, I mean, I was still working in the ICU and I went in every day in my white dress and my white hose and my white shoes and my white cap. And I did that for years and years and years. And then we transitioned to scrubs. And I was alternately horrified, but at the same time, I went, well, this makes perfect sense. And it's really about time because, I'm trying to get blood out of my white dresses and
Yeah.
things worse than blood, and it was a huge laundry challenge. And I thought, well, this makes sense. I wonder why we haven't done it. But culturally, socially, psychologically, moving from whites into scrubs
And dresses
was,
into pants. I mean, because you
yeah.
went from a dress to pants. And that was also something that for a while was not
Well, we could wear
acceptable.
white
Oh,
pantsuits.
you could.
We could wear white pantsuits. So, in all fairness, I
Oh,
did have white
interesting.
pantsuits, but I was about half and half. I still wore my dresses a good bit. But yeah, but going into scrubs just made me feel like we had become a technician or something. I don't know. Only people in the operating room wore scrubs. It just seemed wrong. But
Yeah.
it took me about 5 seconds to adapt, and I was, happy.
I
There
had
was,
two teachers, by the way. I had two teachers during my, because I went to county, we talked about this. I went to county nursing school and they started as a diploma program. And I'll joke and say that the Block sisters, who were twins, Carol, and her middle name was Lynn, and then Carolyn Block.
oh no.
Yes. And they both wore the white dresses and they would even wear the hats. Yes.
Yeah, I wore my hat a while, even with my scrubs, until, they said we didn't have to anymore. And like nobody was doing that anymore. So a lot of changes, that we've gone through. I remember when DRGs came out. And that was when we first had to start being a little bit accountable for the money we spent. And I remember being so offended when I became a nurse manager. This was after my MBA, but we used to go in every month, and they still do this. Nurse managers need to go in, and you have to meet with the CFO or his designee, his or her designee, and you have what's called an MOR, and it's your monthly operational review. And they sit down and they look at your productivity and your labor cost and your supply cost and all of these things. And I had never been trained in any of that. So we used to call it our monthly hemorrhoidectomy, all between us and all the managers. And I remember being so offended when somebody told me to open a package. If I opened a package of 4x4s and I only used half of them, I had to seal it back up and use the other half later. But the problem was that the CFOs, they don't know, like these are sterile. You can't just reuse them. And I remember one of my biggest fights was over 4x4s. Once you open that package, it's not sterile. You cannot pack wounds with a leftover 4x4s that have been opened yesterday. Things like that just took years of, and you're
Fighting.
not,
It's
yeah,
fighting.
just
It's
years.
tiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's tiring to fight.
And
To
that's
yeah.
what nurses go through. And you've got a manager that'll come back from the MOR and they have their next staff meeting. They go, okay, everybody, you got to reuse your 4x4s. And then, all the nurses get mad. But to my credit, I was never that nurse manager. I said, that's what they told me in my
MOR.
MOR. But I'm coming back now to tell you, do not do that. You do not have to do that. You do what's best for your patient.
Yep.
Now, where you can save money, please save money,
Yeah. And that's fair.
but
I
nothing that
think
will
that that's
compromise
fair.
patient safety.
Yeah. I mean, let me just be honest. And hopefully, if anyone from Children's Hospital is like listening, they're going to be like, that's where all the money went. but, but
It was
but
you.
it was me. It was me. But because, we had a lot of families that would come through there and they didn't have a lot of money. And we knew they didn't have a lot of money. And I'd be like, here, take this extra thing of diapers. Just like, here, take these diapers home with you. And I'd like throw them in a bag, like when they were being discharged or something like that. And I'm
And
sure that,
that's what good nurses do. To
well,
this to this day,
yeah.
to this day, that is what good nurses do.
Yeah. I mean, but you don't necessarily understand the downstream effects or whether or not there's other avenues you could take. Maybe you get a social worker involved or you make sure that they're getting access to certain things that they didn't have access to if they don't have enough money, making sure that they have
Exactly.
WIC or they have social programs or things like that. And that's important for nurses to understand, is that it's easy for us to just kind of throw some supplies in a bag, but sometimes it comes back to bite us, in
Well,
different
and you
ways
have to,
sometimes.
yeah, you have to do both. You've got to throw the diapers in the bag to
Yep.
get them through the next 2 or 3 or 4 days
Yep.
till then you have got to also help them access social services. And that's why we have beloved case managers to do that, because that's a whole universe unto itself.
Yes.
But back in my day, we didn't have case managers, so we did all that. But back in that day, we didn't have a whole lot of social services either. So you pretty much just kind of sent people home and threw some stuff in a bag and said,
Here
here,
you
and
go.
figure it out. And
Yeah.
so we're much more sophisticated now with all that. But I'm glad you did that. And nurses today still do that kind of thing.
Yeah, which I agree with you. I think is important. And I think that that's why I was kind of curious when you were talking about the times of being able to be more at the bedside. because it's really tough, right? It's like you can look back and not everything is sunshine and roses, right? For
Right.
sure. But then you can tease out and pick out small things that you're like, but what would we bring back? Like, what would we make sure that we had today if, because it's not all bad, right? There's elements of it that were working, things that were working for the nurse, that they had more
Right.
time with the patients, that there was team nursing, and that team nursing was valuable. And so I think that's the value of history, right? And why we're here today, why we're talking.
Right. And you had back to the team nursing too, and you had time not just with the patients, but you had time with each other. And so if you're a brand new nurse and you're just out of school and you've never changed a wound before, or you've never emptied a drain or put a Foley catheter in or any of those kind of things, there was always somebody on your floor that knew more than you did. You always had a veteran nurse. You've always had a preceptor. You go on a floor now, and there's statistics right now that say like any given unit, about 80% of the nurses are within 2 years of graduation. So
Yeah.
you've lost a lot of that senior nurse. I'm your proctor. I'm your mentor. I'll show you how to do this, or to even talk through things,
Yep.
about questions. And there's I think that in academic medical centers, university settings, you do have more access to education
Yeah.
as a new nurse. But if you're out in a community hospital or, God forbid, a rural hospital, you're kind of on your own,
Yeah.
unless you're very fortunate,
Yeah. I mean,
because the
that's
resources
actually
aren't there.
right. Exactly. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons, and a spoiler alert, because we're talking about this and we haven't actually released it or created it yet fully. But one of the things that we're working on is a Bridging the Gap New to Nursing 8-part webinar series, where we're helping
Oh, good.
these new nurses that are in the first 6 months, year of graduating, who need some of that support, and especially to what you're saying, these rural hospitals or these areas where they just don't have the resources, they don't have some of the educational stuff, or they don't have the residency programs that maybe some of these larger health systems have. And residency programs are such they're such an important that I had a residency program. I also had wonderful nursing school. Like I learned so much, but it's because I went to county, and it was a little bit like, here's all the charts, and we're leaving for 8 hours. Good luck to you. And
Right.
that was it, a little sink or swim. Uh, but I learned so much. And then I went into a nice hospital that had a residency program and really got that extra level of support and care, and then had wonderful mentors and wonderful preceptors within my hospital. And that was 17 years ago. That is so not the case today. It's just that there's so much burnout from the older nurses, and I don't want to say older, the more seasoned nurses.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there are still residency programs. There are still preceptors. People can still, depending on where you work when you get out.
Yeah.
When I was a new nurse, I mean, I went into the ICU, but the only reason was because I'd worked already in the ICU for 2 years and they just kept me. But you couldn't go as a new grad. You were not allowed to go into specialty area. You had to work at least a year out on the floor and get thoroughly beat up out there. And then if you did a good job and they felt like you were smart enough, hard enough worker, they'd accept you into a specialty area. That's not like that right now. There
Yeah.
are, there are parameters. They still do. Um, the specialty areas are very clinically detail oriented. And so you do have to have a good grasp of clinical knowledge to be successful. And sometimes that really does take a year, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it doesn't. So, my point to all this is that so many things have evolved, but I can't right now imagine going in. I think going onto the floor and doing floor nursing. If I was a brand new grad and I just got out of school and they said, here's 8 to 10 patients or 8 or 9 patients. Here, yours. Who do you talk to? Who do you
Well,
talk
and
to?
I don't know. Yeah, who do
Who
you
do you
talk
say,
to?
who do you talk to and say, I'm
Exactly.
scared to, like, I have no idea. Like,
Right. I
you're
don't know
like
what to do.
deer. You're like deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
And the programs now, if you go to an associate degree, they get you through very fast. You get the
Yeah.
minimum amount of knowledge required to do your job, and then you go out into the work field, and then that's when your real education starts, is day one in the workplace,
But it's the
not in
blind
school.
leading the blind. It's almost like the blind
Yeah,
leading the blind because it's like you get out there and like you said, there's like 80% of your colleagues have almost the same level of experience that you have, or just maybe slightly more.
right.
Uh, but there's not that decades of experience. I mean, I worked alongside people who were 20-year veterans, 25-year veterans,
Yes,
30-year veterans,
yes.
and I can't tell you how valuable that was because you don't have at that early stage you don't have the well you might have a gut instinct on things but you don't have the history,
The
you don't have the
confidence.
experience, yeah, you don't have all of this stuff that you have to pull in and you put together to create a picture that helps you make a decision, and it's all based off of stuff you've done in the past that helps lends to that ability to make good critical thinking and everything. So you
I
have to have
remember,
that.
and I can remember the first two things I remember very distinctly. The first time I had to question a doctor on his orders.
Oh,
And it was a real existential crisis for me. It really was. It really was. Because I knew that what he had written was wrong.
and what did he say?
But I was like, had been out in the field for probably less than a year. Um, he was nice, but nevertheless, it was a crisis for me. He was nice. He
Yeah.
thanked me. Um,
How did you do it? How do you remember? Do you
I
remember what
just
you
sucked
said
it
or how
up
you
and
said
I
it?
just did it. It was probably something along the lines of, hey, I know you're a doctor and I'm nothing, but
Yeah.
that's an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But it was probably something along the lines of very humble.
Yeah.
But I was just transcribing your order and I noticed that it said this. Is that really what you meant to write? I didn't say I think it was wrong. I said, is that really what you meant to write? And it's like, no, there should have been a decimal point in there. Thank you for catching it. Well, that could have killed a patient. So, but I knew it was wrong. Like I knew the order was wrong. And I don't know how pharmacology was for you when you were in nursing school, but it was the dreaded course for us. And we had everything
Yeah.
on index cards, and our
Yep.
teachers would roam around and they'd take the index cards away, and you had to know everything about a drug. And I just knew that that was wrong. My other crisis moment was like the first time I had to call a doctor at 2 in the morning and wake him up.
Oh yeah.
But I knew I had to because the patient was like crashing. I,
Yeah.
it's like you have to. I don't care
Isn't it
how,
crazy though that's the dynamic
and we were
that's
scared to death to do things like that.
it's really horrible. I mean, it's horrible that that's the experience, right? Like you're just there. You're just trying to like you're all part of a team. You're all supposed to be the eyes and ears, and you're supposed to be doing that. That is the role.
Well, I am happy to report that in my journey of nursing through the ages, I have seen physicians change. And I have seen their trust in the nurses go up. I've seen nurses'
Yep.
credibility go up. And I say, any doctor that has a half a brain cell in his head needs to go have a relationship with the nurses that are taking care of your patients. And you need to get to know your nurses, and they do. And if they don't like their nurses, they'll be verbal about it. But the nurses that they have respect for, they will listen to them. Like, those
Yep.
nurses will always have their say. And I'm
It
glad to
concerns
see
me.
that.
It concerns me a little bit about the potential for that, for the old dynamic to kind of come back, because we have these much younger nurses. They don't have someone that they can trust, that they can go to. They're inevitably going to call a doctor with a question that the doctor's going to think is ridiculous.
Absolutely happens all the time.
And I'm concerned that we will start to recreate a a lack of respect for the profession, because we don't have the clinical, we don't have the clinical experience in nursing school that we should be having, or the
Right.
mentorship and the preceptorship that we should be having, because that's the buffer between going to physicians with a question that maybe you would have answered by someone with a more on a more senior level.
Well, the only thing I think there's one um, speed bump that will prevent a lot of the past behaviors is that most hospitals and medical staff bylaws now have a zero tolerance policy for abuse. And so if that nurse does call the doctor at 2 in the morning, he doesn't get to just cuss her out and slam
Yeah,
down the phone,
yeah, that's true.
because she will then be required to go report that to her manager, and then it goes on up the chain until it
Yeah,
gets back to that physician and they will be disciplined. That's how it's supposed to work in most cases. I'm not saying that infractions don't happen.
yeah.
I'm not
Or
saying
that people
that
don't report it because
that people
they don't
don't
want
report it.
retaliation, or yeah,
Right. But there is at least now a zero tolerance policy in medical staff bylaws that prevent a lot of those bad behaviors, because, as you know, medical errors, a vast majority of those happen because nobody wants to confront the doctor. There may be a wrong order or something that a nurse will see, but they're too scared to report it or say anything about it because of what you just mentioned, fear of
yeah,
retaliation, that kind of thing. And that is into a whole other conversation about medical errors and missteps and safety events, near misses, those kind of
yeah.
things. A lot of that has been because nurses don't want to challenge a doctor. And I'll tell you, it's still happening even in the OR. Even though we have timeouts and we've had them for 100 years, you go, how could there possibly be a wrong site surgery nowadays? Like, how could that happen? How
Right.
can you leave a sponge in a patient? Because you have to go through all these protocols, right?
Yep. You
Because
have
you
to count
still,
everything. Everything's counted, and
right. But I saw a case not too long ago where the surgeon lost his marbles, said, "We're not doing timeout. I'm not doing it. You start the patient. You this, you that, you this, you that." And to the nurse's fault, they let the doctor get away with it. And there was a mistake made. And
wow.
it was a same site surgery mistake. And you go, how does this even happen? Because every nurse needs to say no, like, just say no. No, we're not starting the surgery until I, the nurse, am satisfied that we have ticked through. Like, you wouldn't
Yep.
fly an airplane until you'd gone through your checklist.
Right. Of
I don't care
course.
if the pilot was in a hurry because he had a date that night and he had to get
Right.
out of there.
But
But
that's also like another female, if you think about it, that's another
yes,
female male dynamic, right? Like if you
yes,
think like flight attendants and captains for the longest time
yes.
was women and men.
And
And
secretaries and bosses.
yes, yes. So
Yes.
and there's always been, I think, that concern, or that silencing. And one
Just
of the
go
things,
along to
yeah.
get along and don't make waves and don't push back and just be a good little nurse and just
And
do
I
what the
think the
doctor tells
way,
you.
yeah, and I think the way you push back at a, or how you feel confident about pushing back, it really does stem from feeling competent in your job.
Yeah, and back to your point, we've now looped around to your
Yep.
point that you were making a few minutes ago. When you're a new grad right out of school, you don't really start to feel competent to probably 3 to 5 years in.
Absolutely. So if you've got let's do the math there, right? If you've got 80%, if around 80% of your staff on the floor at any given time has 2 years or less, think about the chances that those nurses will speak up. What are the chances that the medical errors will increase? How is that going to ripple across and affect the operations of that hospital and the bottom line? And you have to take those things into consideration, like what that's doing to your organization. I think,
Right.
maybe I'm a little rose-colored lenses, but I always feel like, aren't we just thinking about what's safe for the patients? But at the end of the day, it does affect your bottom line if you're having all these medical errors and you don't have people feeling competent or comfortable to speak. So these hospitals, they have to do something about this, because this is going to have grave consequences
Right. And
to the
as a
public.
hospital administrator myself, that was on my mind 24/7. And, I had two best relationships. One of those two was with my chief nursing officer. The other one is with my chief financial officer. And my job is to get all three of us in alignment rather than working at cross purposes. And I felt like I was really, really blessed. I had very good CFOs to work with that got it. And you often have your chief quality officer as well, in there going, we can't do this, it's not safe. Now so many things are regulated that weren't back then, that we do have more safety parameters in play.
Yeah.
For example, computerized charting, computerized physician order entry, scanning, barcode scanning before you give a medication. There's many, because of technology, there's a lot more safety mechanisms in play.
Yeah,
But
before you give a
still,
medication, if there's an allergy to it, it's gonna
flag
alert
it.
you when you go to scan it. As long as you didn't give it first or
Yeah, I
something,
mean,
and then scan it. I don't
you
know how
got a
that works.
Pixis machine that is interfaced with the medication administration record electronically.
Yeah,
So if you go to get 20 milligrams of Lasix out, that's a drawer that it's going to pop you open to. So it's not like you can just grab 100 by accident. So
right.
there are a lot of safety measures in, but again, um, it's really, really important because the CFO has a job to do, and that is to make the hospital financially viable. And Cara, as you know, there are hospitals closing across the country every day and a lot of them are rural hospitals. They
Yeah.
just cannot keep the doors open. And the job of a CFO is extremely difficult. And you're always doing that balancing act between, it's just like you in your own household,
Yeah.
how much money's coming in, what are my expenses going out, and how do you balance that?
Do you think it's a reimbursement? Do you think I mean, from your perspective, all of these like rural hospitals that are closing, what do you feel as someone who's worked as a hospital administrator for so many years? What do you feel is like the major contributor to that?
I think it's twofold. I think part of it is definitely reimbursement. And you've got CMA driving that, Medicare, Medicaid, what they drive is pretty much what commercial insurance is going to follow with in the not
Mhm.
too distant future. So, and you also have managed care that is determining what hospitals will get reimbursed and what they want. And that's a huge, we can do another podcast on that another day, but that's
Yeah.
just a huge factor in what hospitals are getting paid for their services that they're providing. And often, and people don't realize this, people think, oh, hospitals, they've got deep pockets, whatever. But people don't realize what a thin line, a thin margin hospitals are running on, because in hospitals, we are being told what we will get reimbursed. It's not like the olden days where you just filled out an invoice, you send it off, and the insurance company pays you and says, okay. Now, that's another reason we have case managers. You have to justify every penny you've spent on that patient for that diagnostic code. And what if somebody comes in with a diagnostic code and their average length of stay is, say, 3 to 5 days, but they have a complication, they end up staying 2 weeks in the ICU? We still just get paid that bundle. We eat the cost of that. Now, later on down the road, we can submit paperwork for our losses for a year. And again, even pre-COVID, most hospitals did a pretty good job of getting a good portion of that reimbursed by the government if you could justify it. And your
Yeah.
CFO would do all that paperwork, and you could get a lot of that back. Since COVID, not so much. Not so much. Every
Wow.
day is a struggle. Every day is a struggle financially for hospitals to keep the light bill paid, and people don't believe that, but it is true.
What
Unless
would
you
you
have lots
say?
of patrons or donors
Yeah.
or endowments or things like that. Like children's hospitals are usually in a pretty good place.
Yeah. Well,
But
if you're a not for profit or you're um
if you're faith-based or you're a children's hospital, you probably have some income sources other than flat reimbursement. But I worked in the for-profit sector
yeah.
for most of my career, and we have none of that. So, it's kind of like you're at the mercy of what you're getting reimbursed. And just briefly, the other thing I want to say about this is that we've also seen a sharp increase in self-pay patients
Oh,
and people that just can't pay. So, say you're living in a rural community, you've got a community hospital
yeah.
there, and I'm just going to make this up, Cargill is your industry in your town, and it employs 20,000 people out of the 45,000 people that live there. And then
Yeah.
Cargill corporate, for some reason, decides to shut that particular plant down, maybe because it's not profitable or whatever reason. I don't know. I'm just using that as an example. Okay, now what are you going to do? You're still the community hospital. You're still going to have to treat all these people, but now
Yeah.
everyone's lost their insurance. And you see that happening a lot across the country as we lose businesses, and as
Yeah.
businesses get sent abroad, those kinds of things, because the cost of doing business is too high in our country.
Yeah.
So we shut down the plant. We open a plant in China. But now you've got a bunch of people that are underinsured, uninsured, or even if they're insured, as you know, um, it doesn't cover it, because you still got to pay your 20% or whatever it is, which could be exorbitant. To wit, back to my son's podcast, The Cost of Care.
Yeah.
Listen to that
It's
because
such a
it's,
it's very eye opening. I mean, yeah, it's a hugely eye opening one, and I want to ask you one more question because obviously I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and I'm sure I'll have you back on because we'll need to talk about other things too. But I'm curious, just speaking to that financial aspect and how things were reimbursed and how, because it is nursing through the ages, but it's also just healthcare through the ages, right?
exactly.
Is that this is how things are done now, right? And it's not really working, right? Like we can see it's not working because it's
Oh,
upside down
no.
and
Right.
hospitals are closing, and so there's all kinds of evidence to support that. Where do you feel kind of like what you were saying before, like you felt like team nursing was a much better way. We should be kind of going back to doing more of that team nursing. I couldn't agree more. What are the things that you could possibly pick out from the past that you thought maybe were working better in terms of just the health of a hospital system, or how things were reimbursed, or how things were,
Well,
what are your thoughts?
my first thought comes back to patient acuity.
Yeah.
The acuity of the patients now is nowhere like what it was when I was a younger nurse. The patients in the hospital now, even a routine patient on a medical surgical floor, would have been an ICU patient back then.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, the acuity has gone up so much because the object of the game is to keep everybody out of the hospital, right?
Yeah.
So if they're going in the hospital, and you know this, patients that go in the hospital nowadays, you got to be pretty sick to get admitted to a
Yeah.
hospital. And
Yeah.
you got to
Otherwise, they
meet a
want to send you
whole lot
home.
of criteria, or because insurance won't pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, back then, we didn't have the insurance like we do now. Some people
How are
did.
people
Some
paying?
people,
People are just
oh,
out of
people
pocket?
used to pay with chickens and harvest. No, I'm not
No, I
kidding.
know. I know. I have
I'm
4 chickens. I'm thinking about maybe bringing a chicken to my next
you
doctor's
know,
appointment.
and or they'd have to figure out, like, how do we go on a payment plan? Can I pay
Yeah, barters and
$25 a month, or can we barter? And there was a lot of that happened
yeah,
back when I was a young nurse that I've seen disappear. But back to what I would change, I'm not advocating bringing that back or anything, but I'm just
chickens.
thinking,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't always chickens. It could be corn, or,
Yeah.
whatever it is you raised. But I guess the thing for me is the nurses now are expected to do so much more with so much less. Um, Less time, less resources in the way of having someone to talk to, someone to say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. I don't know if that's right or not. Like, what would you do? Um, I need to call this doctor, but I'm really scared." Or that just
Like always having a resource nurse or
always
something like
having
that. Like
somebody,
always having a resource nurse, like on every floor.
and having somebody to help you do a bath or turn a patient. They have lifts now. So you go down the hall in the supply closet, you bring back, you get a lift. The teamwork, definitely, I would bring back. I don't know what we can do about the patient acuity, but I would say the staffing ratios are pretty tight right now. They're all mathematically calculated, but you don't build in for crises. I mean, we just saw this going through COVID. Staffing ratios went right out the window. And I say staffing ratios as a generalized term. Usually you see those in unionized hospitals,
Or
but,
California, where we have actually
well,
like,
where you
yeah,
have unionized hospitals, and I've been a nurse manager in a unionized hospital, but even a staffing matrix, let's just call it a staffing matrix, which is supposed to be a guideline, but often it becomes written in stone. And then, you've got people in the financial end of the hospital that are like, you didn't stay on your matrix. Why didn't you? And they don't understand it when you tell them, why didn't you? So it's a real balancing act between, and good nurses can do this, good managers can do this, good directors can do it, good chief nursing officers can do it, good CEOs can do it, good corporations can do it. Realize that you set a guideline, but it's just that, it's a guideline. But to remember that the patient comes first. And I guess as we wrap up this podcast, I guess that would be my tagline, because medicine has moved into corporate medicine. I don't care if you're for profit or not for profit. Everybody's trying to make a profit.
Yeah.
And healthcare has become extremely corporatized. And that's everything that goes along with that is what I've seen in my 50 years of practice. We have gone from being patient centric to being financial centric. And there's a lot that's been lost. And again, this
Yeah.
isn't just for nurses, this is for physicians,
Yeah.
it's for rad techs, it's for anybody that interacts with a patient has seen this.
Yes.
Um, this evolution, or do you call it devolution, de-evolution?
Yeah, 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 you're right. Like, yeah, it's where something's devolved. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm still not exactly sure myself how we got there, how we got here.
I
Um,
mean, greed is a problem. I mean, I
yeah,
greed tends, like, if you track things to where like something's gone wrong, and it doesn't matter what area you're looking at, there tends to be some element of greed, whether it's in politics or it's in healthcare or
well, and there's also an attitude of entitlement. Um, you see that among physicians, you see that among CEOs a lot. It's like, oh, well, this is my job and I deserve this. And it's the opposite of a service mindset,
yes,
And I've been a CEO and I know what a lot of CEOs outside of my because you read Modern Healthcare, you see all
yeah,
this and you go, oh, these hospital CEOs are making what? Like,
yes, yeah, I know. And
what?
I think that that's what ends up like really pissing some people off, right? Is that they go, well, the president of the United States is only supposed to make $400,000 a year, and I'm not sure what that number is today, but
Right,
because it's a service, right? Like, you are
right.
a public servant, and I'm not sure that it should be any different for healthcare. That you're a public
No,
servant to some extent.
well, and I'll take it even a step further. I think it should be a ministry. And when you're a nurse and you're at the bedside, that needs to be a ministry. That's a calling. It's not a job. It's a calling. And if you can't look at it like that, you're in the wrong profession. You should get out of nursing.
What
And
would
I
you
would
say to
say I
the?
would say the same thing all the way up to the
Yeah.
CEO because the leadership starts
Yes.
at the top.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be about the money. You have
Right.
to be fiscally responsible, but that's not what drives your success. What drives your success is, have you helped people? Have you
Yeah.
saved lives? Have you been there for people in times of crisis? This work is not like anything else. It's not like Home Depot or banking or real estate. And no offense to
Yeah.
any of these people, but this is different. You've got people at the worst times in their life. They're
Yeah.
sickest. They're many times on death's doorstep. They're afraid. Their families are afraid. You tell me any profession that has people at a more vulnerable state
Yeah,
than
and I think that,
than
like, I
healthcare.
think you're right. I think that I totally agree. I feel like it is a calling, right? Like, I feel like nurses go into this oftentimes. Well, some people go into it. They feel like it's recession proof, or it's a good job that'll last, for a long time, despite technology changes and stuff like that.
Right.
Uh, but I think if we change the focus,
Uh-huh.
and if everyone from the very, very tippy top is a public servant, all the way to the people that are direct patient care, that's where, if you set the tone and you say all of us are public servants, all of us go into this knowing that we're getting kind of public servant, pay. We're getting the
Right.
salaries of public servants. Well, it attracts a certain type of person, whether it's to that place at the CEO, or whether it's the person who is providing direct patient care, nurses, techs, doctors, and then it just changes the whole landscape and the whole culture, it's where I think nurses end up having a problem is when you say, oh, well, for you it's a calling, but for that CEO it's a business. It's
Right. It's a
right that
business.
yeah, that's where you lose nurses, because nurses are like, well, wait a minute, so like I'm the indentured servant and
Well,
they're making millions and millions of dollars a year, and
but I
I'm
can't,
kind of
but I have to recycle a package of 4x4s.
yeah, and then they're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't work for me, right? So it either has to be across the board, everybody is a public servant and knows that there's pay that's associated with that. And obviously, like, people need to be able to make a living, buy a house, send their kids through school, take a vacation. That still needs to be part of like what you should be able to afford if you are a nurse.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
they're not doing it for free, but yeah.
Well, and I'm also happy to say that in this day and time, nurses can support a family. I mean, the
Yes.
pay has come a long way from what it was um, back in the early days of my career, and I'm glad to see that. And I think that part is getting better. But
Yeah.
back to your question of what would I pick out, it's hard to just say, okay, what would I pick out in nursing, because it's a whole part of nursing is a part of a system that's broken. And if I could just wrap with one thing, I would say is nurses, take care of each other.
Oh,
It's not every man for himself. Don't turn into that. Don't be like that. Help.
yeah.
Help each other. Strengthen each other, because the stronger you are, the better you can take care of the patients. The better nurse you can be. Take care of each other. Go
Oh
back
my
to the
God.
old ways.
Go back to yeah. That I think that is such a beautiful thing to end with, is that, you know, what's that takeaway for you after having gone through everything that you've experienced over many, many decades of nursing, is that the thing you're left with is that we have to take care of each other. I could not agree more.
Because it's a battleground out there. It is. And every day nurses walk in. You
Yeah.
never know what you're getting. You never know what you're going to walk into. You never
We can't turn on each other.
exactly. Exactly. We have to help each other or the whole
Yeah.
thing falls apart. So,
America, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. And, I know this was kind of a long podcast, but when you're talking about nursing through the ages, come on, it's a lot to do. It's kind of a lot.
I know it kind of is.
Yeah. And then, of course, you say something, it's like, oh, well, we have to kind of dig into that a little bit, or we have to talk about this a little bit. So, but I think that at the end of the day, the listeners will get so much value and so many wonderful takeaways, and all the other people that listen to the podcast, because I know it's not just nurses. There are administrators. There are people that can listen to this and take some things away from a management level and from an administrative level to say, you know what, she's right. We should be instituting that here in our hospital, or we should be doing this. So I'm
Or
just
at
so
least
deeply
have the
grateful.
conversation, at least be open. If what you're doing isn't accomplishing the goals that you want, try something different.
Yeah.
Even if it is from the 1970s, maybe we had something going on right back then too, you
Yeah,
know?
it's such a great point, and I feel like that for me that was such a good. What I really enjoyed taking away from all of this was just like, nothing is ever all bad, right? In the past,
No.
well, I mean, I guess there are situations where there's things that were all bad, but but in this situation, there's usually something that you can take away, and you can say that was working, and we shouldn't have gotten rid of that.
Right.
And
Right.
let's bring that back, but with also these other things that we have that we didn't have back then, like technology and all the stuff that you were talking
Call
about.
it a refresh. Call it an
Yeah, it's a
update.
refresh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just maybe you don't do it exactly the same way, but you kind of bring back the concept and adapt it to
Yep.
modern day parameters.
Yeah, like
And
there's virtual, the team that we're talking about, somebody could be a virtual nurse, right? Like you could have
right,
virtual nurse that's there, that's part of the team who you can call on at any time.
right.
That's not there on the floor, but you can ping them and talk to them, and get a mentor. So I think that's exactly right. Is that you reinvent it a little bit,
Exactly.
but with the same type of model, and that's what I was really hoping we would get out of this podcast today, and I think that's exactly what we did get.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much for having me. And
Oh,
I always look forward to hearing from you. So
thank you, America.
don't be a stranger.
I absolutely won't. You have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and please give your son a big hug from me the next time you see him.